Fives was cornered and knew he had minutes, perhaps only seconds, before the Chancellor's guards found him. His mind worked frantically as he hid in an abandoned corridor of the lower levels of Coruscant, the datapad trembling in his sweaty hands. He had tried to tell the truth about the chips to General Skywalker and Captain Rex, but the words came out confused, desperate, and he saw the doubt in their eyes. Worse still, Chancellor Palpatine himself was involved, and Fives understood that any attempt to expose the conspiracy through official military or government channels would be immediately blocked. He needed someone with real political power, someone who wasn't under the Chancellor's direct influence, someone who had the courage to challenge the system. The face of Senator Padme Amidala appeared in his mind, remembering how she had always treated the clones with genuine respect, as if they were real people and not just disposable numbers. With trembling fingers, he compiled all the data he had stolen from Kamino, attaching the diagrams of the inhibitor chips and his own observations about the secret protocol. "Please, Senator," he murmured while configuring the encrypted transmission to her personal channel. "You need to believe me. All the clones are in danger. The Republic is in danger." He pressed the send button at the exact moment he heard heavy boots approaching down the corridor. The message was transmitted, carrying Fives' last hope that the truth would be revealed, even if he didn't live to see it happen. Senator Padme Amidala was in her private quarters when her communicator emitted an emergency signal. The message was fragmented, almost indecipherable, but one word repeated insistently: chip. Fives' face appeared on the holographic screen, his eyes conveying a desperation she had rarely seen in a clone soldier. He spoke rapidly about a conspiracy involving all the clones, something implanted in their minds since birth. Padme felt a chill run down her spine as she absorbed every word. When the transmission ended abruptly, she remained motionless for long seconds, processing the magnitude of what she had just heard. If that were true, the Republic was in far greater danger than any separatist threat. Padme couldn't ignore Fives' warning. She discreetly summoned a medical droid she completely trusted, a model that had served her family in Naboo for years. Together, they examined the fragmented data that Fives had managed to send before his death. The files showed diagrams of a biological device implanted in the clones' brains, something designed to override their free will upon a specific command. The droid confirmed that the technology was real and extremely sophisticated, and was present in all the clone soldiers it had managed to scan remotely. Padme felt her determination solidify like steel. She needed to act, but with extreme caution, as she didn't know how far this conspiracy extended. The senator began her own parallel investigation, using her most discreet contacts. She accessed medical files of wounded clones who had undergone brain surgeries, finding consistent patterns that confirmed the existence of the inhibitor chip. Each discovery left her more alarmed about the extent of the manipulation. Padme realized this wasn't the work of separatists, but something much more internal and sinister. The precision with which the chips were implanted suggested direct involvement of the Kaminoans and, possibly, someone very close to the center of Republican power. She needed allies, but who could she trust in a scenario where even the Republic's defenders were programmed weapons? Padme decided she needed concrete evidence before exposing any information. She gained access to a wounded clone who was recovering in a private medical facility. With the soldier's permission, the medical droid performed a complete scan of his brain, confirming the presence of the organic device. The clone, upon learning the truth, was visibly shaken, questioning his own autonomy and purpose. Padme held his hand and promised she would find a way to protect him and his brothers. She knew she was entering dangerous territory, challenging forces that operated in the Republic's shadows. But the senator had never backed down from injustice, and she wouldn't start now. The collected data was unquestionable. Padme organized all the evidence in an encrypted file, creating backup copies in locations only she knew. She reviewed the information multiple times, looking for any flaw in her logic or interpretation, but everything pointed to the same terrifying conclusion. Someone had turned the Republic's army into a weapon of mass control, just waiting for the right moment to activate it. The senator understood that revealing this precipitously could trigger the very catastrophe she was trying to prevent. She needed a careful plan, trustworthy allies, and above all, time to act before it was too late. Padme looked out the window of her quarters, contemplating the endless lights of Coruscant. The planet city pulsed with life, millions of beings living their lives, oblivious to the danger hanging over all of them. She thought of Anakin, of how this revelation would affect him, considering his deep connection with the clones, especially with the 501st Legion. The senator closed her eyes and made a silent promise. She would do everything in her power to protect those she loved and to save the Republic from the betrayal growing in its own heart. The war was far from over, but now she knew the true enemy, and she was ready to face it. Padme knew she needed to warn the Jedi Council, but her first attempt revealed a critical problem that completely changed her strategy. When approaching the Jedi Temple for a meeting with Master Yoda, she noticed the unusual presence of surveillance droids positioned in strategic places and felt furtive glances from figures in the shadows trying to appear invisible. Her political experience sharpened her instincts, and she realized the temple was being monitored much more intensely than normal, with resources suggesting high-level government involvement. Any open conversation about the chips would be immediately intercepted by whoever was behind this conspiracy, compromising her entire investigation. Padme instantly modified her plan, keeping her conversation with Yoda strictly about superficial legislative matters and pending Senate votes. While speaking about procedures and constitutional amendments, her eyes communicated a different message to the old master, who tilted his head almost imperceptibly, understanding that something was deeply wrong. The Force allowed Yoda to sense Padme's urgency and carefully controlled fear. She left the temple without revealing anything substantial, but with the seed of an alternative plan already germinating in her mind. The senator left the Jedi Temple with measured steps, maintaining the composure of someone who had merely fulfilled another diplomatic obligation. But internally, her mind worked frantically, reassessing every aspect of her approach and recognizing she had underestimated the extent of the surveillance. She began tracking surveillance patterns in Coruscant, using contacts in security and intelligence services to map who was being watched and by whom. The results were even more alarming than she feared. Not only the Jedi Temple, but also the apartments of several opposition senators, civil rights organizations, and even some medical facilities were under constant and sophisticated monitoring. Padme recognized the political signature of these actions, the mark of someone consolidating power through absolute control of information and preventive suppression of any opposition. She needed allies who were outside the surveillance circle, people who could move freely without arousing immediate suspicions or triggering alarms. It was then she thought of two names she implicitly trusted: Captain Rex and Ahsoka Tano, both with unique access and abilities. Rex had the clones' trust and knew the Army's internal workings, while Ahsoka had left the Jedi Order and operated outside official monitoring systems. Contacting Rex was relatively simple, as he frequently escorted Anakin on missions and had regular access to Coruscant's upper levels. Padme arranged an apparently casual meeting in a maintenance hangar in the industrial levels, far from prying ears and security cameras that could compromise the encounter. When she revealed what she had discovered about the inhibitor chips, showing the technical data and medical evidence she had compiled, Rex was visibly shaken, his hands trembling slightly as he held the datapad. "Fives was right all along," he murmured, guilt and anger competing in his voice, thinking of how many times he had doubted his fallen brother. Padme placed a hand on his shoulder and explained they needed to act with extreme care and methodically, building a resistance network before making any open move. Rex immediately agreed, his loyalty to his clone brothers superseding any other consideration or personal risk he might face. He revealed he knew other captains and commanders who occasionally questioned orders, men who maintained a degree of mental independence that could indicate greater natural resistance to rigid conditioning. These clones would be the first recruits of a resistance yet to be born. Finding Ahsoka was more challenging and consumed several days of careful searching, as she had left the Jedi Order and maintained an extremely discreet profile in the city's lower levels. Padme used communication channels she had established during years of humanitarian work and refugee assistance, eventually locating the young Togruta in an abandoned industrial district. When they met in an old warehouse that smelled of machine oil and oxidized metal, Ahsoka listened to Padme's explanation with growing horror stamped on her face. "This means my men," All those who fought by my side and whom I considered friends are time bombs waiting to explode? She asked, her voice laden with barely contained emotion and betrayal. Padme confirmed with a solemn nod, understanding the pain this revelation caused someone who had commanded clones in battle. Ahsoka clenched her fists, her connection with the Force pulsing with renewed determination and controlled fury against whoever had perpetrated this injustice. Then we need to save them before it's too late, she declared with a firm voice. And Padme knew she had found an invaluable ally who wouldn't back down from any challenge. Together, they began drawing up an action plan that balanced urgency with necessary caution. The three formed the core of what Padme called the Silent Resistance, a name that perfectly captured the nature of their mission. The strategy was simple in concept but extremely risky in execution. Identify clones who demonstrated greater individuality and independent thinking, and discreetly remove them from situations where they could receive the fatal activation order. Rex used his authority as captain to reorganize small units, placing his more questioning brothers in positions that would keep them away from main combat zones and commanders who might be more aligned with questionable orders. Ahsoka, using her Force abilities and extensive Jedi training, began investigating Kaminoan facilities through contacts she maintained in the underworld, looking for ways to neutralize or remove the chips without alerting supervisors or triggering security protocols. Padme, in turn, began creating a carefully woven legislative support network, identifying senators who could be trusted when the truth eventually came to light and would be impossible to hide. Each movement was calculated, each conversation carefully rehearsed to avoid arousing suspicions. The tension of operating under constant surveillance was exhausting, but none of them considered giving up. The Silent Resistance grew slowly but consistently, cell by cell, clone by clone, building a network of trust amid the chaos of war. Rex recruited commanders like Wolf and Gregor, men who had already demonstrated notable capacity to question questionable orders and think for themselves. Each conversation was a calculated but necessary risk, as revealing the truth could result in denunciation if the clone in question was too conditioned. But the truth about the chips was so shocking and fundamentally violating that few clones hesitated to join the cause once they fully understood the magnitude of the threat to their autonomy. Ahsoka established contacts with doctors who could perform discreet surgeries to safely remove the chips, operating in secret clinics in the city's lower levels where the law had less reach. Padme coordinated everything from her position in the Senate, maintaining an impeccable facade of normalcy while building a resistance network that could save the Republic when the critical moment inevitably arrived. They were racing against time and against an invisible enemy, but each saved clone was a significant victory against the silently approaching darkness. Hope began to grow, even amid constant danger and uncertainty about when they would be discovered. The discovery was inevitable when operating against someone as meticulous and paranoid as the Supreme Chancellor. Palpatine had built his surveillance network with sinister precision over decades, and eventually, one of his most loyal agents intercepted a coded communication between Padme and Rex about clone movement. The Supreme Chancellor held the datapad with trembling fingers, not from fear, but from contained rage that threatened to explode in destructive fury. Decades of meticulous planning, of careful manipulation, of pieces moved with surgical precision were being threatened by an idealistic senator who didn't know when to stop asking inconvenient questions. He summoned his closest and most trusted advisors for an urgent meeting and analyzed his options with calculating coldness. Order 66 was programmed to be executed at the perfect moment, when the war reached its dramatic climax and the Jedi were dispersed and vulnerable across the galaxy's battlefield. But now, with Padme mobilizing a growing resistance and potentially alerting the Jedi about the true nature of the threat, that perfect moment was slipping from his absolute control like sand through his fingers. Palpatine made a decision he knew was risky but necessary. He would drastically accelerate the timeline, even if it meant acting before the ideal moment he had planned for so long. The order was transmitted through maximum security encrypted channels to clone commanders across the galaxy simultaneously. Execute Order 66. The cold, mechanical voice echoed in thousands of clone helmets at the same time, activating deeply rooted programming. In Coruscant, the response was immediate but fragmented in ways Palpatine hadn't anticipated. Half the legions obeyed instantly, turning their weapons against their Jedi generals without hesitation, their faces empty of emotion while fulfilling the protocol. But the other half, those Rex and Ahsoka had reached and freed from the chips, remained completely motionless, confusion and horror spreading through their ranks like uncontrollable fire. Some clones with chips still active struggled internally against the irresistible command, their hands shaking violently as they pointed blasters at companions they'd known for years and considered brothers. The planet city plunged into absolute chaos when brother turned against brother without warning, and Coruscant streets transformed into a battlefield with explosions illuminating the sky. Civilians ran in panic while blaster fire ricocheted off buildings, unable to comprehend why the Republic's defenders were killing each other. The sound of combat echoed through the urban canyons, creating a symphony of destruction. At the Jedi Temple, Master Yoda felt the disturbance in the Force like a physical blow that almost knocked him down. "Betrayal, I sense," he said to Master Windu with a grave voice, who was already activating his purple lightsaber upon perceiving clones advancing through the sacred corridors with murderous intent. Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was on an external mission coordinating operations in another sector, received an urgent warning from Padme through a secret channel moments before his own clones turned against him with lethal precision. Anakin Skywalker, who was with the 501st Legion supervising security patrols, witnessed the horror firsthand when half his men began shooting the others without explanation or warning. Rex was at his side, screaming for them to stop with desperate voice, using his authority as captain to create confusion in the ranks and prevent summary executions of his brothers. The civil war among clones had begun brutally and bloodily, and the Republic's future hung by an increasingly fragile thread. No one had imagined that betrayal would come from within so completely. Anakin looked around in absolute shock, unable to process that his own men were destroying each other. "Rex, what's happening?" he shouted over the sound of explosions, seeking any rational explanation. Padme coordinated the resistance from a secret bunker she had prepared for this exact eventuality, equipped with secure communications and supplies. Holographic screens showed battles erupting throughout Coruscant, clones loyal to the chip conditioning fiercely facing those who had recovered their autonomy through surgical removal. She was in constant communication with Rex, Ahsoka, and now with several Jedi Masters who had miraculously escaped the initial execution thanks to the warnings she had managed to send. "We need to reach the Senate," she said to Bail Organa with unwavering determination, who had joined her in the bunker bringing other trustworthy senators. "If we can expose Palpatine publicly before the entire galaxy, maybe we can turn the tide and show the clones the truth." Bail agreed with the assessment, but both knew that reaching the Senate building would be nearly impossible with the city in complete state of war and checkpoints at every intersection. Padme, however, already had a detailed plan, involving the old maintenance tunnels she had known since her early days as a senator exploring the capital's infrastructure. These tunnels were rarely patrolled and could provide a safe path through the combat zone. "We have to move now," she insisted, checking her personal blaster. "Every minute that passes, more lives are lost in this madness." The battles in Coruscant streets were different from anything the galaxy had witnessed in its long history of conflicts. It wasn't Jedi against Sith in philosophical duels, or Republic against Separatists in clear battle lines, but brother against brother, genetically identical men destroying each other because of a microscopic chip that stole their will. Rex led the loyal forces with exceptional tactical skill, using strategies he had perfected over years of war to minimize casualties while protecting innocent civilians caught in the crossfire. Ahsoka moved like a force of nature through the battlefield, her lightsabers deflecting blaster fire with supernatural precision while she disarmed clones without fatally injuring them, always seeking to save instead of destroy even when attacked. Anakin was completely emotionally torn. Each clone that fell under Allied fire seemed to rip a piece of his own soul and throw it into the abyss. These were his men, his brothers in battle who had fought by his side in countless missions, and now they were destroying each other while he watched helplessly. "Stop! All of you, stop now!" he shouted, using the Force to push clones away from each other, trying to create space between the combatants. But the conditioning was too strong in many of them, and the fight continued relentlessly, staining the streets with blaster burn marks. At the Jedi Temple, the Masters formed a coordinated defense that balanced protection with reluctance to harm the clones. Yoda, despite his advanced age and small stature, moved with surprising speed that defied perception, his green lightsaber creating a brilliant arc of protection around the younger Padawans who were terrified. Master Windu coordinated the Jedi forces with tactical mind, working frantically to understand the full extent of the betrayal and formulate countermeasures. Plo Koon and Ki-Adi-Mundi led evacuation groups through the temple's secret passages, protecting non-combatants while repelling successive waves of conditioned clones who attacked without mercy. Communication between the Masters was tense but efficient, coordinated through the Force. "Survive, we must," said Yoda, his voice remaining calm even in the center of absolute chaos, a beacon of serenity amid the storm. "The darkness will reveal itself completely, and ready to face it we must be." The Jedi were being tested like never before in their entire millennial history, not only in their combat abilities and Force mastery, but in their fundamental compassion when facing enemies who were victims as much as aggressors of this horrible manipulation. Each decision to use lethal force weighed on their consciences, creating impossible moral dilemmas in fractions of seconds. Anakin Skywalker was at the emotional epicenter of a choice that would define not only his personal destiny, but the future of the entire galaxy for generations. On one side, Palpatine had finally revealed his true identity as Darth Sidious, Sith Lord who had orchestrated the entire war, offering unlimited power over the Force and seductive promises. On the other side was his family, the woman he loved more than his own life, and the devastating truth Padme had discovered about the complete manipulation of the clones he considered brothers. While the battle raged around him with growing intensity, Rex at his side fiercely defending against clones controlled by the chips, Anakin felt the crushing weight of years of psychological manipulation trying to push him toward the darkness with promises of power. He thought of Padme, of her extraordinary courage in exposing the truth even knowing the immense risks she ran against invisible forces. And for the first time in a long time, perhaps since he was a child in Tatooine, Anakin Skywalker made a choice driven not by paralyzing fear of loss, but by unconditional love and hope for a better future. "No," he said aloud, his decision echoing through the Force like a wave that swept away the darkness. "I choose the light. I choose my family." Anakin's decision reverberated through the Force like a shockwave that could be felt by sensitives across the entire planet. He confronted Palpatine in the Supreme Chancellor's office, climbing the stairs with renewed determination, but not as a humble apprentice or desperate supplicant, but as an equal adversary who finally saw clearly. "You manipulated everything from the beginning," Anakin said. His blue lightsaber ignited but held in defensive position, the blade humming with contained energy. "The clones, the entire war, the Jedi Council. Everything was meticulously designed to control me, to transform me into your weapon." Palpatine smiled coldly, abandoning any pretense of being the benevolent Chancellor, Sith Force lightning beginning to dance threateningly in his twisted fingers. "You could have had power beyond your wildest imagination, Skywalker. We could have ruled the galaxy together as master and apprentice. Now you'll have nothing but ashes and regret." The battle that followed shook the building to its foundations, Force lightning colliding with light blades in a deadly dance. But Anakin wasn't alone in his confrontation. Obi-Wan arrived moments later, having received the urgent coordinates from Padme through the communicator she had provided. And together, Master and former Padawan faced the Sith Lord with synchrony born from years fighting side by side. The fight was brutal and exhausting, testing them to their limits, but eventually, with Anakin channeling the Force through his love instead of his corrosive hatred, they managed to defeat Palpatine, leaving him gravely wounded on the floor. "It's over, Palpatine," Anakin declared, keeping his saber pointed. "Your reign of manipulation ended today." With Palpatine exposed and incapacitated, contained by energy restraints that blocked his access to the Force, Padme took the political initiative she had carefully planned. She convened an emergency session of the Galactic Senate, transmitted simultaneously to all the Republic's worlds through channels that couldn't be blocked, where she methodically presented all the evidence she had collected over weeks. The new government that emerged after months of negotiation and compromise was fundamentally different from anything the galaxy had seen in millennia of history. Padme and Bail led the formation of a democratic alliance, a carefully balanced system that distributed power among multiple representative councils instead of dangerously concentrating it in a single executive who could be corrupted. Anakin Skywalker found peace in a way he never imagined possible during his years tormented by prophecy and fear. With Padme at his side, holding his hand while they worked together on reconstruction, he witnessed the birth of Luke and Leia in a future that wasn't stained by the darkness he had feared for so long. Padme and Anakin worked together, side by side with Bail, the reformed Jedi, and countless others, to ensure that the sacrifice of so many wouldn't be in vain, and that the freedom they had fought for would be preserved for future generations, including Luke and Leia, who would grow up in a better world than the one their parents were born into.